James Cameron's Titanic made history by dramatizing a legendary maritime tragedy, but another, even deadlier disaster has quietly remained in the shadows, both in history books and on screen. Die Gustloff, a German television film released in 2008, tells the story of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, whose 1945 sinking claimed over 9,500 lives, more than 6 times the death toll of the Titanic. Despite its staggering scale and devastating emotional core, Die Gustloff never crossed into global awareness. And while the reasons are complex, they reflect how deeply controversial and morally complicated this World War II-era tragedy remains. A Titanic-sized tragedy lost to history. Die Gustloff debuted quietly on ZDF, Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen, and ORF, the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, receiving a decent domestic response but almost no international fanfare. Unlike Titanic, the film wasn't a global theatrical event. It was a 2-part TV miniseries that, despite its quality, never left European waters. Visually, the production punches well above its weight. With a staggering budget exceeding 10 million euros, it became one of the most expensive German television films ever produced. Director Joseph Vilsmeyer, Stalingrad, The Last Train, brought a rare cinematic gravity to the project, and despite some now-dated CGI, the scope and emotional weight remain striking. The plot: a fictional couple in a historical nightmare. The story begins in the final months of World War II, as thousands of German refugees flee the advancing Soviet army. Their salvation appears to be the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, a former Nazi leisure ship turned emergency evacuation vessel. At the heart of the narrative are fictional characters Helmut Kading, Kai Wiesinger, a civilian captain reluctantly pulled into duty, and his fiancée Erika Galitzky, Valerie Niehaus. As the ship takes on over 10,000 passengers, far beyond its intended capacity, the sense of claustrophobic dread steadily builds. When a Soviet submarine finally strikes, 3 torpedoes tear the vessel apart. Within minutes, the cruise liner becomes an icy grave for thousands. Children, civilians, wounded soldiers, and naval personnel alike perish in one of the deadliest maritime disasters in recorded history. Why you've never heard of Die Gustloff? There's a reason Die Gustloff never became a household name like Titanic. The story is bound up in the darkest chapters of the 20th century. The Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't just a passenger liner, it was a Nazi propaganda vessel, originally created for Hitler's Strength Through Joy program. Although by 1945 it was repurposed for evacuation, many of its passengers were military. Over 1,000 U-boat crew trainees and hundreds of wounded soldiers were aboard. Their presence made the ship a legitimate target under the laws of war, stripping it of any right to display Red Cross insignia. When Soviet Captain Alexander Marinesko launched his attack, he was celebrated as a hero. Yet the human cost was immense. Over 8,000 civilian refugees also died, including countless women and children. To this day, the event is mired in political controversy. Right-wing extremists cite it as an example of Allied war crimes, often omitting the ship's mixed military-civilian status. A realistic and heartbreaking retelling. In terms of execution, Die Gustloff succeeds admirably. It captures not just the scale of the disaster, but the intimate human stories within it. From the panicked stampede to the frigid, deadly sea, the film replicates its historical source material with stunning authenticity. One particularly harrowing scene portrays the second torpedo blast wiping out nearly 400 female Navy auxiliaries in the ship's pool. Only 3 survived, and even they suffered horrific injuries from shrapnel-like tiles. Elsewhere, hundreds of crew members are shown entombed in the lower decks, cut off from any escape. The result is a tragic but powerful portrait of human suffering, bolstered by excellent performances and a clear respect for historical truth, if not for clean-cut moral clarity. The moral dilemma: sympathy versus sanitization. Die Gustloff tries hard to separate its characters from Nazi ideology. Helmut Kading is portrayed as noble and morally upright, even somewhat apolitical. This, however, creates a deeper tension. In striving to humanize victims of a Nazi disaster, the film risks softening the edges of complicity. Despite repeated reminders that these refugees were not die-hard Nazis, the film occasionally leans too far into victimization, offering scenes that can be cherry-picked and weaponized by extremist groups. The film's insistence on moral nuance, while necessary, puts it in a precarious position. Audiences must balance empathy with the understanding that, in wartime, very few are entirely innocent. A tragic story worth knowing, despite the controversy. The tragedy of the Wilhelm Gustloff is real. So is the pain of its victims. But because the ship's very identity is steeped in the legacy of Nazi Germany, its loss has remained a taboo subject, especially outside of Europe. And yet, Die Gustloff is a story worth telling. It captures the brutality of war with emotional clarity and haunting realism. It doesn't excuse the ideology of the time, but it does remind us that war's cruelty is indiscriminate. The innocent often suffer most, no matter what flag their ship once flew. In the end, Die Gustloff may not be a perfect film, but it is an important one. It challenges viewers to confront the gray areas of history, where good and evil aren't always easily separated, and where tragedy doesn't discriminate.